The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferens.
So how are your union dues being spent? Well, the Labor Department issues new rules and will run them down. Meanwhile, members of SAG-AFTRA ratify a 4-year contract. And today on the show, the Union Busters of America. Welcome to the Monday, June 8th edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms, and that includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. Featured guest today is Bob Funk. Bob runs the LaborLab, which is an organization based out in Montana that fights for a world, this is right off their website, LaborLab.us. They fight for a world where workers are free to join together without the fear of employer coercion and intimidation. And we all know there's a lot of that going on. How much? Well, a report that LaborLab did, partnering with the Economic Policy Institute, finds that U.S. employers spend roughly $1.7 billion every year on union avoidance. Amazon leading the pack. They alone spend over $26 million on union avoidance consultants. This was last year. Other major spenders include Unity Point Health, just over $2 million, Lab Corporation, $2 million, and Premier Health, about $800,000. The report also highlights the law firms that are the biggest players in union avoidance. Littler Mendelson, that's the big one. Jackson Lewis, Seyfarth Shaw, Morgan Lewis, and Fisher and Phillips. Altogether, these firms handle over 19% of all NLRB cases going back to 2024. And they made a lot of money doing this, generating an estimated $282 million from their practices. These are the Union Busters of America. You need to know this. Bob has done a great job on what's been happening here with his so-called persuader reports. Every week he comes out with a persuader report on what law firm or what company is doing to make sure that their workers are not organizing in the workplace. LaborLab.us, that's a website you want to go to. Now, brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. $38 billion of assets under advisement serving the needs of Taft-Hartley funds, corporations, public funds, endowments, foundations, as well as religious organizations. You can find more at boydwatterson.com. The Department of Labor recently announced a final rule designed to increase financial transparency for unions regulated by the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act. The rule creates new requirements for financial disclosures, especially for the country's largest labor unions. Now, listen closely. Labor unions with more than $40 million in annual receipts will need to file a new report with the Department of Labor. Originally proposed during the first Trump administration, that rule went through the notice and comment period back in 2020, but was never finalized. Now it has been finalized. So the Department of Labor stated that the rule is meant to help inform union members about where their union dues are being spent, and it goes into effect in a couple of weeks, July 1. Okay, so labor unions with more than $40 million in annual receipts will need to file that new report with the Department of Labor. Members of the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of TV Radio Artists, which is my union, voted to ratify a 4-year agreement with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. The negotiations between the parties began in February and resulted in a tentative agreement last month. The Associated Press described the latest round of bargaining as a relatively drama-free process, contrasting with the contentious 2023 negotiations that culminated in the longest actor strike in Hollywood history. The new CBA builds on the last contract's AI use provisions by further restricting use of synthetics and providing added protection against AI replacing members' work. AI performers are allowed only if they bring significant additional value compared to a live actor. That's interesting. Additionally, the CBA merges the SAG Producers Pension Fund and the AFTRA Retirement Fund. The contract received over 90% approval from the members who voted. Only about 19.8% of members actually voted. Now, SAG-AFTRA is not the only Hollywood union negotiating a contract this year. In April, screenwriters with the Writers Guild of America, they voted to ratify a 4-year agreement with the motion pictures industry, and the Directors Guild of America, the DGA, led by President Chris Nolan, is currently negotiating, and their current contract is set to expire at the end of this month. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Bob Funk of LaborLab on the Union Busters of America. Back in a few minutes. You're listening to America's Workforce.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LIUNA to keep America running. Over 70,000 public employees are part of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, delivering critical services such as healthcare and emergency response, as well as maintaining roads and sanitation systems. Even the National Postal Mail Handlers Union, representing over 47,000 U.S. postal workers, is affiliated with LIUNA. Find out what it takes for LIUNA to keep America running at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org. This segment of the show is brought to you by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For more information, please visit bmwe.org.
American workers are sick of struggling to get by. It's time to get ahead. In the Teamsters Union, workers are winning industry-leading contracts, historically high wages, fully paid health care, and retirement benefits you can count on. Across the country, Teamsters fight alongside our brothers and sisters to secure a better life. It's what we've been doing and how we've been living for more than a century. When we fight, we win. Join us. Be a Teamster.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Steelworkers. You can find more at usw.org. America's Workforce is presented by the Laborers International Union of North America. Feel the power right now at liuna.org.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast. AWF Union Podcast. I'm going to throw a number out at you. $1.7 billion. A lot of money, right? Well, that's the amount of money that U.S. employers spend on a yearly basis on union avoidance. We call them the union busters. And I'll tell you, no better person to talk about union busters than our featured guest on the show today. That would be Bob Funk. Bob is involved in an organization that he created some years back called LaborLab. LaborLab.us. which fights for a world where workers are free to join together without fear of employer coercion and intimidation. And we know there's a lot of that going on. Bob, welcome back to America's Workforce. Thanks for joining us today. And I'll tell you, I saw this story from the Economic Policy Institute a couple of weeks ago, and I see you partnered with them to come up with some numbers. Talk to me about that, brother, because, you and I have had this conversation. We knew that number was pretty high, 1.7 billion. Did you expect that amount?
As always, thank you so much for having me on, Flash. Honestly, I think the number's even bigger. That's the truth here. For a long time, we've dug into the numbers on the consultants, the people that come in and really meet face to face and conduct the captive audience meetings and the interrogation and surveillance. And we knew that was, hundreds of millions of dollars. But what that we didn't account for in those estimates and those studies was the law firms. And really, that is the backbone here of the union busting industry is the law firms. We're talking about the Ogletrees and the Littler Mendelsons out there. Littler Mendelson, for example, is Starbucks union busting law firm. And we know how effective they are at fighting contracts. I mean, it's been 4 years now where they've dragged this process out. These companies make a lot of money. We're estimating that Littler Mendelson, which takes in hundreds of millions of dollars a year, a big chunk of that is for union busting work. And that's not just fighting union elections, but that's also at the table when it comes to fighting contracts. As we know, winning a union election is just the first step in the process. And unfortunately, in this country, you can drag out the contract process as long as you want. And these law firms have an incentive to do that as well, right? Because they get paid a lot of money to do that at the same time. But I want to just say that this number, this $1.7 billion, this is just for the consultants and the law firms that are involved in union busting. We still haven't put a number together on HR, labor relations teams. For example, Amazon and Starbucks both have a huge labor relations team. Whenever they get a whiff of an organizing campaign, they fly this team out there. Employee engagement programs, which we know a percentage of those are designed just to stifle any organizing efforts from the get-go. We're not even talking about polling. Amazon has hired some of the biggest polling firms in the country to do polling on their members to see how they can beat back unions. So we know that this is billions upon billions of dollars invested in fighting unions. And the reason we were so excited to put this number together when it came to the law firms is most of these law firms operate without any scrutiny from the public, from workers, or from the federal government because of loopholes in federal law where they can just say, oh, we're just giving employer advice, so we don't have to disclose how much we're getting paid. So that's why we did so much research, found out how much they're actually charging per hour to get a number like this. And it just really shows you how much is stacked up against workers.
You mentioned Amazon. I'm reading Amazon alone spent over $26.6 million on union avoidance consultants in 2025. I assume they're the top of the list. They're the big player here.
Yeah, absolutely. So that $26 million is specifically for, again, what we traditionally think of as a union buster, the guy that comes in and does the captive audience meetings and harasses you while you're on shift all day. That's $26 million just for those outside consultants. It doesn't include their law firms. It doesn't include their internal team at all. There was one union buster that made $7 million last year. $7 million for flying around and sending subcontractors to warehouses across America. $7 million to one consultant, $26 million on union busting consultants. And we literally have people dying in warehouses.
So sad. So sad. Tell me how this works. You mentioned when Amazon, again, they're the big player here. When they hear there might be some union activity in a certain city, immediately they send out a team. Okay, they send out a team, and do they add the law firm? Or do they do this all themselves, or do they add a law firm later? How does it usually pan out?
Thank you for that clarification, because again, they have their own in-house legal team, right? They're spending a lot of money on that to fight the union busting, but then they bring in outside firms as well to assist with that. They bring in armies of consultants. And then Amazon workers are the most surveilled workers in America. And if you think that that surveillance of their phones, of their workplaces isn't being used to bust unions, we know it is. We've even heard of, organizing campaigns like in North Carolina where former organizers are getting followed around by and harassed by drones around the facility. I mean, this is how post-apocalyptic doomsday-ish it is in the corporate America we are living in right now.
Yeah, yeah. Big Brother is watching you, and boy, are they watching you. Exactly. This report that you did with the Economic Policy Institute, how did that happen? Did they call you up and said, "Hey, Bob, we're doing this thing on union avoidance, union busters in America. We need your help on that." Is that kind of what happened here?
We're really happy to partner with the Economic Policy Institute, which is a great organization that puts out some amazing research and policy papers. We've actually partnered with them in the past around union vesting spending, including a report a couple of years ago that was really about the consultants, where we found that it's over $400 million just spent per year on the third-party consultants, which was part of that $1.7 billion number. So we've been very lucky to collaborate with them a number of times over the last few years. We recently had our summit last month. They presented there as well. And it's just really exciting to work with other groups that are committed to holding the union busting industry accountable so that workers can actually join unions, since about half of American workers want to and only 1 in 10 belong to a union.
Yeah. Oh, I know. If given the opportunity, I believe it's somewhere between 60 and 70 million people in this country would go union. They would do that, but they know they're going to get harassed. They're going to see that drone. I don't want no drone flying over me. And so they're very intimidated by this whole thing. Let's get back to the law firms here. You mentioned Littler, Mendelsohn. I'm reading a couple. Jackson Lewis is another big one. Morgan Lewis, Fisher and Phillips. Have you noticed when you were doing this report, because of the amount of money that these firms are bringing in? I'm reading altogether these firms, and there are more, handled over 19% of all NLRB cases. This goes back to 2024, generating an estimated $282 million from their labor practices alone, just dealing with the cases before the court. Obviously, this is very lucrative. That being said, are more law firms thinking, you know what, maybe I should join the group? Is that happening right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Littler, Mendelsohn, Morgan Lewis, they've been doing this for decades. In fact, they're now exporting their style of union busting all over the world, dramatically changing things because they found out, we can make a lot of money anywhere in the world busting unions if we can do it in the United States. But yes, every state, every region has a cottage industry of anti-union lawyers who specialize in making the election process for workers as difficult as possible and make the bargaining process as difficult as possible, because that's really the most insidious union busting tactic out there, and that's delay. I mean, we don't talk about that a lot, but you have people that are incredibly brave, taking big risks, and they're simply overworked and trying to take care of their families. And if you can delay the process as much as possible, that's incredibly demoralizing and deflating for an organizing campaign. And they know, since we don't have any laws in this country, even though a few have been proposed to speed up the contract process, that is one of the easiest ways to kill worker empowerment.
Another question here, Bob. We're speaking with Bob Funk, who is the owner-operator of a great organization based in Montana. He is a union member. Of course he's a union member. He's a member of LIUNA, a presenting sponsor, Local 1686, which is a statewide organization in Montana. He's also a member of the AFT and, was it the AFT and the NEA? They joined out there?
I worked formerly for a merged state a state union, which was AFT and NEA merged.
Gotcha. I want to talk about the run. Again, Amazon #1, well over $26 million a year, followed by Unity Point Health at 2.1 mil, Lab Corporation, little over 2 mil, Premier Health, their Sigma Network, Corewell Health. Okay, with what I just said, we have healthcare in there. Let's talk a little bit about that. because we follow what the nurses are trying to do, organizing the National Nurses United Group and California Nurses Association, been very vigilant, organizing hospitals. And there's a lot of pushback, and you're seeing these hospitals too. They're making a whole lot of money. The CEOs are making a whole lot of money, and they're supposedly nonprofit institutions, which is kind of interesting in itself. Is this the trend now? Because they're realizing we all need healthcare. We all need good healthcare. And obviously the people that are working in healthcare are trying to get a decent salary. So is that the trend right now?
Absolutely. I mean, there is probably, on the whole, healthcare is either the first or it is at the very top of industries where union busting happens. And that's because we also see a lot of interest in organizing. Nurses are mission-driven workers. They care deeply about their work and their mission. You know, the fact of the matter is most nurses aren't organizing necessarily about wages. They are organizing because it's about understaffing, not enough beds, burnout, because they care deeply about their patients. For example, the Unity Point Health campaign, which was the second largest spender on union busters in the country in Iowa. Now, those nurses did amazing work and they won, despite the company spending over $2 million just on third-party consultants. This is at a hospital where people are literally dying in the waiting room, waiting for beds, which is why the nurses are organizing. But the hospital prioritized trying to kill the union over listening to their nurses. This is really the only way that they can get the attention and get the ear of this CEO. Healthcare industry is spending an insane amount of money on this. For example, one of the consultants for Amazon that I was talking about earlier that made $7 million, their specialty is actually busting nurses unions across the country. We know that we have a healthcare crisis in this country. Nurses actually want to do something about it, and the CEOs do not want to surrender an ounce of power, even though these are the frontline workers that actually make hospitals run and work.
Bob Funk is our featured guest today. He runs LaborLab out of Montana, laborlab.us. Go to that website. You'll learn a whole lot. I'm going to take a quick break here. I want to talk about, I sent you the story last week about the Department of Labor finalizing a rule, and they say protecting union workers. Anything that comes out of Washington saying they're protecting union workers, I am a bit suspect. So I want to talk about that next here on America's Workforce. Back in a few minutes. You're listening to America's Workforce.
This is America's Workforce. More shows available at awfradio.com.
It takes LaUna to build North America's infrastructure. From roads and bridges to schools and skyscrapers, the men and women of LaUna, the Laborers International Union of North America, build the projects we depend on. From constructing the Freedom Tower on the site of the former World Trade Center to untangling Washington, D.C.'s congested interstate, LaUna members do the work that matters. Find out what it takes to be built by LaUna at LaUna.org. That's LIUNA.org.
America's Workforce appreciates our sponsor, the Columbus Central Ohio Building and Construction Trades Council, who represents more than 18,000 workers from 19 affiliated local unions and district councils.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Iron Workers. You can find more at ironworkers.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Heat and Frost Insulators Labor Management Cooperative Trust. Find out more at insulators.org/LMCT.
America's Workforce Radio is sponsored in part by the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, District Council 6, representing painters, glazers, drywall finishers, and sign and display industry workers. They remind you that belonging to a union is your right as an American.
The Heat and Frost Insulators and Allied Workers are proud to be a title sponsor for America's Workforce Radio. The Insulators Union is leading the way in the mechanical insulation industry, fire stopping, and infectious disease control. Regarded as North America's energy conservation specialists, these professionals are known for their professional work and dedication. You can learn more about the Insulators Union at insulators.org.
Now, back to Ed Flash Ferens with America's Workforce.
And don't forget, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. Let's go back to our featured guest today, Bob Funk, who is the man in charge of LaborLab. That's a firm that tries to protect workers the best they can, and there's a lot of union busting going on to the tune of $1.7 billion a year. That's how much U.S. employers spend. And Bob is of the opinion it's even more than that. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's flying under the radar here. Talk to me about these LM20s. I mentioned when we close the first segment here about this DOL, Department of Labor rule. They finalized a rule, what they claim is going to protect union workers. I'm sure you took a look at that. What is this all about? Maybe you can explain what the LM20 is and how employers are, well, they're a little bit slow in reporting all this information, aren't they?
Without getting too much in the weeds, there are a couple of key forms that are supposed to be filed when it comes to labor relations in this country. And these are key disclosures to ensure workers have all the information they're entitled to, whether it's their union or their employer. The fact of the matter is that unions on an annual basis have to file what's called an LM2, depending on their size. There are some other forms as well, but they have to file a financial disclosure that is incredibly exhaustive, so workers know how their union is spending dues and everything. And, that's great. The problem is that we are operating on a completely uneven playing field. The law is being enforced for the rule followers, but the rule breakers are being let off the hook. And what I mean by that is union busters, when they have been hired, are supposed to file within 30 days what's called an LM20 to notify the public and the Department of Labor how much they're getting paid and what they're getting paid to do. This is really, really important because a lot of union busters don't even share their actual names with workers, even though they're with them all day, every day. They use aliases. They insinuate that they're from the National Labor Relations Board and not from some union busting firm. So this disclosure is really, really important. The problem is only about 1 in 5 union busters even bother to file it on time. And the same goes for employers and their annual disclosures as well. These numbers that we've been talking about, a lot of them we were able to find through disclosures. But again, we have a massive problem here where the majority of employers that hire union busters don't ever disclose how much they paid, even though they're federally required to under the law that was passed by Congress. And what we've seen since this law was passed 60 years ago is that the Department of Labor has only enforced one element of it, and that is the element that forces disclosure for unions and workers. So great, but enforce it for employers and union busters as well. So the fact of the matter is that what we see through what the Department of Labor is doing, specifically through the Office of Labor Management Standards, is they are continuing this trend of completely turning a blind eye to the union busting industry and employers. And this is a really, really easy thing to fix. I mean, there was an Office of Inspector General report that was done on this that said Department of Labor, OMS, is failing to protect workers' rights to organize. Now, has OMS done anything about those recommendations? The answer is no. Nothing has improved. They clearly are not taking workers' rights seriously when you have a massive multi-billion-dollar industry that is allowed to operate in the shadows because of an unwillingness to act at the Department of Labor. It's not about resources. It's about a lack of willingness to do. Why? Because corporate America has a lot of sway in Washington, D.C. So when it comes to the Labor Management Relations Disclosure Act, there's an incentive to continue to scrutinize employees while letting the other side of the coin off the hook almost 100% of the time.
Bob, it should be no surprise to you and those listening to this show that in the second Trump administration, with Project 2025 pretty much being implemented, that they more or less ramped up what's going on here with union avoidance. Doesn't that seem to be the case? I mean, you mentioned Amazon. Amazon's always been doing this, but they seem to be doing more now because it's almost, they're getting a free pass on it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we see under this administration, the union busting industry and its clients in corporate America are operating without scruples because they know that what are the repercussions going to be? They have a license to do basically whatever they want. As you just pointed out, Amazon has sharply increased its spending on union busting. Why? Because it's not going to face any scrutiny. You have a whole litness of organizations, some incredibly shocking that they've jumped on this, just simply trying to challenge the fact that the NLRB, say the National Labor Relations Board, is unconstitutional. I mean, it is open season on workers' rights right now, because we know that there are no friends in Washington, D.C. that have the willingness or the power to protect workers' rights right now. So, yeah, absolutely. This has always been a problem. It's not new, but it definitely has accelerated in the last couple of years here.
Bob, if you don't mind, let's talk about the service that you provide here. And I've been privy to the reports that you send. We call them you call them the Persuader Report. And it's a rundown of who in a current week or month is doing whatever they do to make sure that the company that is hired here does not go union. It doesn't always work. I noticed there's some election. You mentioned the nurses in the first segment there, and I salute those here on the show. When I see that, well, they spent all that money and it didn't work, and I'm sure the lawyers will still get paid on that, and they'll try again down the road, no doubt about it. But who gets these Persuader reports here that you put together?
We are a nonprofit organization. Our goal is to make sure that workers are empowered through information, which means that we are simply making sure that workers and the public and policymakers have access to information about how the union busting industry operates, the information that they are actually entitled to under the law. As we were just discussing, the Department of Labor doesn't take enforcement of this law very seriously. So we had to set up a nonprofit organization to collect that information and distribute it to organizing workers and activists and advocates all over the country. So if you're ever facing a union busting campaign, we urge you to please reach out to us, because we have spent an enormous amount of time and resources collecting all of the information that workers are entitled to before they vote. And we want to make sure it gets in your hands and the hands of your coworkers, especially if you're in the middle of an organizing campaign or even a contract fight. So you can visit our website, which is LaborLab.us, shoot us an email at contact@LaborLab.us, and myself or someone from our team will get back to you right away to make sure you have a sense of what is happening behind the curtain here. We're trying to pull it back here a little bit, and also assist to make sure members of the public know what's happening at their local employer. Because the fact of the matter is 70% of Americans who are consumers support unions, right? Most of them are truly shocked to find out that they have union busters. Most Americans are shocked to find out that they have union busters in their backyard. It's not just the Amazons of the world or the Starbucks and the Walmarts. You have local community businesses that are choosing power and greed over your neighbors.
People love their Amazon packages, but they do not realize what the workers go through to deliver those packages. It's very, very sad. Well, there is a value to your service, my brother. Maybe I always wrap up these segments. Those listening right now, we have a lot of unions that listen to America's Workforce. You could always use some help, right?
That's right, brother. Thank you so much. Yeah, as I said, we are a nonprofit organization. We will help any union, any worker, regardless of sector, location, any of that. But the only reason that it's possible is because of the support that we receive within the labor movement itself. We really are building a utility here for all organizing workers and researchers, but that's only possible to sustain our growing team, because the need is huge, is through donations that we receive from individuals and local unions and national unions around the country. And we're very grateful for the support, but the demand continues for sure.
Those of you listening, just go to that website and you can help them out. LaborLab, all one word, LaborLab.us. Bob Funk does a great job on this. You take care, my friend, and I'm sure we'll be talking more in the not too distant future, okay?
Thank you so much.
And that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Coming up tomorrow, a step toward rail safety. We'll hear from the Sheet Metal Air Rail Transit Union. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, And be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.